Thank you, Arnold, for this, for your presentation and for impressive initiatives uniting minority NGOs. I already have some comments, but we'll leave them after the second speech. Šárka, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. I have a presentation which is a very simple one, and it's not very beautiful, but I still would like to use it. Could you pass me the computer? Okay. So first of all, I would also like to open with thank you to the organizers for letting me speak here. And is it? Yeah. Okay, it's working. I already mentioned my name about 3 or 4 times today, so I will not do it again. As the purpose of this short contribution will be to talk about anti-discrimination coalitions, I will try to keep it to the point and try to focus on the specifics of the coalition. But in case you have any other questions about the Czech Republic, our legislation, or any other issues, please feel free to bring it up later on. As you might know, and as was already mentioned today here, the Czech Republic is not only famous for the beer and Prague, perhaps, but is also quite famous around all Europe for discriminating Romani children in access to education. And because I consider this to be the biggest discrimination issue we have right now in the Czech Republic, I will be talking about a project that I work on in my organization, that is the Fair School project. So the Fair School project began as a reaction to the first one of the later on quite famous row of the European Court of Human Rights decisions on the discrimination of Romani children in access to education. There was the DH and others against the Czech Republic case. I don't know if you are familiar with the case. It's a 2007 decision. It was a big thing in the Czech Republic, at least. As you might recall, the discrimination of the Romani children in access to education was found on the basis of biased testing methods. That is, the Romani children that were segregated in the special educational stream were discriminated because they were not tested well. They were in fact not disabled, and therefore they had nothing to do in the special educational system. As much as we are quite glad for this decision, of course, because at least it started the discussion and the action, let's say. At the same time, I would like to point out here that what the European Court in fact said at the same time was that it is actually okay to segregate the children that have disabilities. So it is actually okay to have a two-stream or segregated educational system. And although it seems like it's not important for the education of Romani children and the discrimination of Romani children right now, I'll try to point out later on that it actually very much is, at least that's what I think. So as a means of implementing the judgment, we focused on preparing the schools for the acceptance of Romani children into mainstream education. We started as good example, let's say, or good practice approach, and we developed a network of fair schools that spread the know-how of how to work with diversity, that were inclusive, let's say, and that helped us to spread the knowledge and the know-how to other schools as well. And that was the one thing we did. Of course, we provided a lot of legal advice and assistance to parents. We went with parents to schools and, checked if they were in fact accepted to mainstream schools or how the procedure went, etc. We did a lot of policy analysis and recommendations. We did situation testing, etc., etc. There were a lot of problems were identified by us and by the government and by everybody. It was a big issue. A lot of steps were taken. But as you know already, here we are in 2015, and the situation is such that the first ever infringement procedure according to the Race Equality Directive was initiated against the Czech Republic by the European Commission. And it was precisely because of the discrimination of Romani children in access to education. So you could say that it is not a very good result of 8 years of work on the issue. And I would agree with you. I think it's quite frustrating, and it is not a good result. So what is the problem? Where did we go wrong? So my argument here would be this. A narrow approach to discrimination that we adopted, the discrimination on an individualized basis, proved not to work, at least not in this particular case. You can't really tackle discrimination just by pointing out that discrimination is wrong, just by telling schools, you know, you need to accept the Romani children, you cannot segregate. They don't know what it means really. So you can, however, that's what I believe, fight discrimination by trying to build a society or a school, in our case, which is open, which respects the rights and needs of every individual, and which cherishes diversity. So that was our approach, by developing the network of fair schools that we knew were fair to everybody, that didn't discriminate. We would spread the know-how and showing that this is actually good, that it's beneficial for everybody. I will use a quote which is quite new, and it's my favorite one. It's a quote of Adam Weiss, the legal director of European Roma Rights Center, that he used earlier this autumn at a roundtable that we organized in Prague. And he said that the aim of the Anti-discrimination Coalition is to expose segregational mentality. I really like this term. What he pointed out is that this mentality can take many forms. It can be directed against many groups, but it uses the same premises. It says that people that are deemed to belong to the same group should stay within that group, or diversity is not something to be shown. So it's kind of a broad approach to this segregational issue. Okay. The mentality is the same whichever group you use it against. So this is how I'm finally getting to the point, and that's how we formed the coalition, or a platform, as I would call it. And it's a broad coalition for the support of equal access to education for all children. The coalition is called the Czech Society for Inclusive Education. It doesn't have the word discrimination in it, so that's the positive approach to it, I would say. And it's a platform of various organizations working in the area. What I consider extremely important is that the coalition is really broad. It involves Roma rights organizations, it involves organizations that will work with migrants or foreigners, national minorities, but at the same time disability organizations, there are advocacy organizations, legal organizations, you can read all of it, at the same time professional educational organizations. So each organization's view is really important, and at the same time each organization brings in a specific know-how. So, for example, organizations that consider or that work mainly within advocacy, they organize commenting and amending the laws and strategies. They initiate work in working groups and issuing statements and policy papers, etc. So we know if something's going on within the legislation or the government work, the advocacy organizations, they are there, they will let us know, they will involve us. I think that's very important because we don't need to check everything that's going on. At the same time, the client organizations, which for example I would consider Liga to be as well, provide the case studies, the field information and the participation of the rights holders, which is extremely important because this is how we identify where the problem is or where the problem for the rights holder is in practice, how the rights holder would identify the problem and perhaps what the solution might be according to them. And of course legal organizations, Liga is as well, legal organization develop the systemic and legal arguments. So each organization has something to chip into the coalition and does that within the coalition. At the same time, the coalition organizes monthly meetings and weekly sends news and recent developments, etc. So we keep to be informed all the time about the news and what's going on, etc. Now, because it's supposed to be about the role of a minority rights organization within the group, I will talk about just briefly about what Liga does within this organization. We do advocacy, of course, but that's not the main point, I would say. As we have the access to the clients and the situation on the ground, because we work with the clients that come to us and that complain about discrimination, we try to base all the arguments that go out of the coalition on the real cases, on the case studies and on the stories precisely, because it's immensely important for the policymakers to make the problem real for a real voter. This is what our role is. At the same time, we invite the clients, the stakeholders, to meetings with the decision makers. This is also really important in order to, for the same reason, basically, to enhance participation. So when we have a hearing of educational committee at the parliament, we invite the parents of a child who has been discriminated against, and suddenly the argument is much stronger that we are trying to make. And of course, we litigate cases as well. There are not a lot of organizations in the Czech Republic that litigate discrimination cases. We have 4 discrimination cases at the courts right now. So this is our specific roles as well. And the partners from the coalition, if they have a person that complains about education, they usually refer them to us, and we know whether we will litigate the case or not. And we provide a lot of legal advice and other advice. We support monitoring. And we maintain the network of fair schools, as we always did, and we provide education for the stakeholders about their rights. So we provide easy to access information on discrimination in brief brochures, in questions and answers manner usually, so that it's easy to read. And we organize workshops to relate them with what's in the brochure and what it actually means, etc., etc. So I cannot stress this enough, because I think I said it again like a few times today, that the main issue that we have and that has been identified was the shockingly bad education in the anti-discrimination field, and not from the perspective of the rights holders or of the victims of discrimination, but of the courts and of the administrative bodies as well. So if the person that's been discriminated against doesn't know what discrimination is, of course the person is not going to take any steps to defend. So.
You still have 2 minutes.
Oh my God, so I didn't even get to the point I wanted to make. Okay, so what is even more important, and I wanted to stress, now I'm getting to the point, is that the specific know-how of each organization is really important also in another manner, and that's every organization has a different perspective according to their field of interest, and this is how we try to manage a broad and systemic and inclusive approach to discrimination. There are, however, also challenges, of course, and this is what I want to mention right now. I want to give you an example of a situation that has not worked out quite well, although I think otherwise the coalition is working quite nicely. We've just gone through a major school reform whose aim was mainly to fight against discrimination in education. Of course, big incentive was this infringement procedure from the European Commission. So it was very much all about the Romani children and Romani access to education. And the reform came out pretty well. The system was set as to answer to specific needs of every child and provide support that is not based on disability, but rather on identification of educational needs. That's all very nice. So the Romani children will have access to a real support and financial support, I mean, as well, without having to be diagnosed. That means that we will not be segregated in special schools. That's all very great. And you could say, well done. Except we all concentrated so much on the Romani children discrimination issue that they received the support, that we kind of forgot that the children with different maternal language, or the children from other minorities, or children who are migrants, need support as well. And those children got left out of the support system. So what happened is that we so concentrated on the narrow Romani discrimination or narrow approach to discrimination about, the specific minority, that we forgot the broader thing, and that is to build a system that will be inclusive to all. And that's how I mentioned earlier. I think the problematic thing is that we enable segregation towards any group that will be bad for any group that's ever been discriminated against. So I believe that the problem with our approach, our European Court of Human Rights approach at first, and the reason why so many Romani children are still segregated in schooling environment is that we developed this narrow approach to discrimination. So the challenge in building anti-discrimination coalition is maintaining the good work in in tackling the discrimination of all groups. So we must make sure that we work within the same concepts and principles, that our arguments synchronize each other rather than work against each other, even if it happens unintentionally. And I think my time is up. I'm sorry I didn't manage to mention everything I wanted, but I think precisely the actions that we're taking right now, and it will be about Actio Popularis, I wanted to mention, is that we are being successful right now precisely because we have a very broad coalition, because we managed to bring many organizations on board and to convince them that we are working on the same issue and we're working within the same concept, and this will be beneficial for everybody. So apart from practical issues that are listed here in the presentation that you may encounter when working within the coalition, I believe that working together against discrimination by finding a common goal is immensely important. After all, if you manage to find and to develop an approach that can accommodate the needs of all groups that are discriminated against, you have found the right approach. And that's the best thing to do. Okay.
Thank you, Šárka. It's for this interesting example from the Czech Republic, where you mentioned to build up a permanent coalition working for the inclusion of children in the educational system. I have plenty of questions, but I would prefer first to give this opportunity to you, or let me, okay.
I have one question to Arnold and one question to Šárka, so that she can elaborate more on what she wanted to say. Okay. Can you hear me? It was very interesting for me what you said about how the state language regulation is understood in Georgia vis-a-vis the law on state service and the using of minority languages, because it very much reminds me of the situation in Slovakia, and it's exactly the issue between the relationship between the rights of the person, of the individual, and the responsibility of the states, because we have a national minority language law.
I'm sorry, if I may allow, please keep it short, if possible.
Okay. So how is it? Because you said that the civil servants are not obliged to know or speak the language, or what?
They're obliged.
They're obliged to speak the minority language.
State language.
The state language. Okay, but how can you then somehow fulfill the obligation to? So how can then the minority citizens enjoy their right to use their language, if it is embedded in somehow in a law? Because it's really a problem in Slovakia that the minority persons have the right to use the language in official communication, but the civil servants are not obliged to speak that language. So how do you solve that? And Šárka, so would you elaborate more of how you and your organization understands the concept of inclusion?
Thank you, Šárka.
Thank you. So I should be brief, as I understood, right? Okay, I'll try to be. So the first great question, my favorite question, what is inclusion, according to my organization? So I would say in a very general manner, it's an approach, it's creating an environment that can accommodate the needs of every individual person according to their individual needs, that it's open and accommodating. That's in a very simple manner, I would put it. At the same time, as a lawyer, I would inclusive education is an education that qualifies or that fulfills all of the demands of the quality education. That is the scheme. I don't know if you know it, the AAAQ scheme. Education needs to be available. It needs to be accessible, adjustable, and quality. So that's inclusive education, and that's, I think, the framework we should be working in, not just in the racial discrimination scheme. That's what I think. And About the judgment, the truth is that the issue before the European Court of Human Rights was that the parents actually gave informed consent to their children being placed to special schools. It is still existing in the law. It's supposed to be the safeguard that no children that are not supposed to be in the special school will be in the special school. Of course, it doesn't really work, you know. The power relation is completely different. It's never really informed consent, or not in many cases. And of course, if it's Romani parents, very often parents whose education is not that high, they are not really being given information as to what consequences the placement into special school has. They never really know. So that's why it didn't stand before the European Court of Human Rights. And how do we deal with it? It is difficult. It is difficult. It's always the dialogue with the client, trying to explain what consequences it has, why it's better to have quality education, not easy education, why it's better to risk certain difficulties in the mainstream education. It is always difficult, and that's why we not only give legal advice, but at the same time give pedagogical support. So we try to, if we're working with a client, we want the client to be in a mainstream school, we give support to the school as well. So we try to help them integrate a child that may have some sort of different needs if the school is not used to working with that. Within the coalition, thank you very much. I would actually say that it was very strong, because even the human rights organizations, humanitarian organizations, all of them work in Roma rights right now, at least partly. So I consider this a little bit, I do think that the Roma voice was strong enough. That's why the law was written as so to accommodate the Roma minority needs. And that's why sometimes maybe it forgot a little bit of the different needs as well. So I think it was represented quite well.